Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the old world. We know with the release of Warhammer Old World just around the corner that one of the supported factions in Phase 1 is going to be the so-called Empire of Man. But is that name really truthful? Is the Empire a realm of men? So if you look back over the history of the Empire, we will see that absolutely yes, the Empire of Man is a realm which is predominantly made up of humans, often quite prejudiced and biased humans, reflecting society of the late medieval and early Renaissance eras. But the truth is slightly more diverse, and it's not just about humans. There are other races, other cultures within the boundaries of the Empire. Back in the annals of time, the imperial armies could draw upon these different races, the different cultures, when it came to building up the ranks of troops available to it. So let's cast our mind back to some of the diversification options available historically for an imperial army. The first one that leaps to mind, the Halflings. Now, by the times of 8th edition in the end times, the Halflings were largely the residents of an area called the Moot, or Mootsland. And the Moots came into being at some point around the 11th century on the imperial calendar. But to be granted its own area, there has to have been a community of halflings there for quite some time, and certainly living within the bounds of the wider empire. Who are the halflings? Well, they are effectively your Tolkien hobbits. They're always hungry and tend to be renowned for their abilities with the bow and as scouts, as opposed to frontline warriors. Most often be seen with a bow, most likely I would think in reality a short bow given their diminutive nature. But there's also the potential for halflings to be pressed into service with other weapon types. Maybe a pike, for example, would lend itself nicely to a halfling, possibly also some kind of carbine or fusil short musket type weapon. There are only ever a few models produced for the halflings by Games Workshop. I think my favourite of that being the halfling hot pot, which I suppose is kind of a bit like the mortar that was a more mainstay of the Warhammer Empire army, albeit at one point did have its own special rules. Who else is there? Well, there's the Imperial Dwarves. Dwarves have lived in the Empire for centuries. They came as craftsmen, they came as traders, they came as adventurers, and in some cases outcasts from their own lands. And conclaves of dwarves have made their home in the Empire since pretty much the dawn of the Empire. And logically, if these dwarf communities are within a lord's domain, you'd expect them to be able to be called up by that lord to serve in his armies. Not the full dwarf rota, but possibly just some of the basic dwarf units, your warrior unit, maybe some crossbows, things like that. Maybe a unit of miners at their absolute most. And again, historically, you could have a dwarf element to your imperial army. You didn't have all the exciting range of models available to a proper dwarf force, but they could make an appearance and give you that little bit of flexibility if you wanted a tough, resilient, defensive, heavy infantry unit. Another race which bears a little bit of consideration are the ogres. So we know that the ogre kingdoms aren't going to be part of Phase 1, and things are all a little bit quiet on that front, and they've not moved around as much as they would have done by the time of 8th edition, etc. But ogres are wanderers, and it doesn't seem inconceivable that some of them will have made their way into serving various imperial nobles in their forces. So a few bulls, maybe a man-eater or two may well make an appearance in an imperial army. And I think ogres are really useful, not just for being a unit by themselves, but they could actually appear as individuals. One of the great things about Warhammer units was their ability to have fillers within them. Effectively, instead of maybe 4 infantry, you'd have a single figure on a bigger base taking up the space of those 4 things and a little diorama or something on it. But you could easily see in your block of halberdiers, for example, a Lanznaxi sort of dressed ogre parked in the middle of the unit, just to reduce the model count a little bit. Adds a little bit of visual interest to the unit, doesn't affect the rules, but is also consistent with the history of the Empire and the way that culture operates. One thing I would add, I think overall, apart from perhaps just looking at how these cultures could fit into the battlefield, is that thinking about the other races of the cultures that live alongside humans in the Empire does give us some creativity around our storytelling. Maybe we're going to use the Empire rules, but build a halfling force. Some firebrand revolutionaries seeking full independence from the Empire, for example. But if there's one lesson from this, I think it's we've got to remember that the old world has nuance. It's always had these elements of nuance within it, and we need to bear away from sort of oversimplification. The Empire is just men, for example. The undead armies, just undead. Back in the time, the vampire counts, for example, could actually have local militia, humans fighting in their ranks. All of which brought extra colour to our games. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much for listening to me on the topic of the diverse empire and its importance, really. If you've enjoyed this video and others like it, do consider subscribing. It's the best way to support the channel. Only takes a click and will help you get notified as to when a new video is released. Once again, thank you very much for listening. I am Return to the Old World. Have a great day.